everybody. Hope everybody's doing good today, having a great day. I know we are. I'm over away from the house right now, loading water to take back to the house, to the cattle. Got to do that about every other day, every third day when it's cool like this. About every other day in the summertime. Take about 600 gallons a trip to get it done. But anyway, no, I just wanted to drop a few of my opinions and some of my non-expert analysis on the situation that's going on in Ukraine. I don't know how many of you guys followed what I post or the memes that I've shared and post, some of my comments and stuff like that, pictures. But and a lot of y'all may not like what I have to say, and that's okay. You know, the war in Ukraine did not start on the 24th of February, 2022. It started back in April or May of 2014 when the democratically elected government in Kiev was the victim of a coup. That coup was not only sponsored but engineered and carried out by no less than the United States, members of the European Union, members of NATO, and Britain. Yes, that's right, we overthrew the government in Ukraine. Now, what started the civil war in Ukraine was, see, the people that live in Western Ukraine, they're not Russians. They're not Slavic people. They're actually West European people, or Europeans. The people that inhabit eastern Ukraine, the Donbass region, which includes the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, as well as that strip through the southern part of Ukraine from the border just west of Rostov, Russia, all the way to Odessa, Ukraine, including the Crimea. All those people are Russians. They're Slavics. The people that live in West Ukraine hate Russian-speaking people. Can't stand them. But anyway, that's what caused the Civil War. The Russian-speaking people didn't want to live under what they called an illegitimate government. They rebelled. They withdrew from Ukraine, and Ukraine went to war with them. Now, the Russians just happened, because of the military bases and things down in Sevastopol and throughout Crimea, they were able to have enough troops and things down there to prevent any type of incursion by the Ukrainian government. Although the Ukrainians did shut off their water supply, they were able, however, to attack the people in southern Ukraine and eastern Ukraine, or what they call the two breakaway republics. Now, in late 2014 into 2015, there were two different negotiated settlements. We'll call them settlements, called the Minsk Agreement and the Minsk II agreements. Those were agreements brokered and guaranteed by the governments in Berlin and in Paris. The Ukrainian government was a part of it, and the Russian government was a part of it, as well as the two breakaway republics, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. What the Minsk Agreement basically said was that the government of Ukraine had to negotiate a peace settlement with the leaders of the two breakaway republics. They never would do it. They never would negotiate with them. They refused. They wanted to negotiate with Russia, with Putin. Putin told them repeatedly, hey, I'm just here to help mediate. I'm not a party to this. You guys have to do it. Ukrainians have to negotiate with the leaders of the two republics. They never would negotiate with those people. And the two guarantors of the agreements, Germany and France, which, truth be known, the State Department and the U.S. government has a lot of sway over those governments. That's what I'll call that, sway. They have a little stroke. Nobody would push Ukraine to negotiate and abide by the Minsk agreements. They wouldn't do it. Instead, the Ukrainians kept troops parked on what they called the line of contact, and shelled and shot and killed upwards of 14,000 Russian-speaking people over 8 years. Now, at the same time all of that was going on, the United States, NATO, the European Union kept making overtures and squawking that they were going to admit Ukraine into NATO. Well, that was a lie from the very beginning, because one of the very first requirements to join NATO is you cannot have any internal or external conflicts. So it was just crap. But what we did over that 8 years, us at NATO, we trained Ukrainian troops, provided them weapons, equipment, communications, blah, blah, blah. And at the same time, the government kept pushing Russia, more and more NATO involvement in Ukraine. But Putin had told us way back in 2007, 2008, that he would not abide NATO missiles parked on Russia's doorstep. Who can blame the man? Who can blame him? The current director of the Central Intelligence Agency is a man named William Burns. Back in 2005, he was actually the ambassador to Russia, to Russia. He wrote a letter back to the State Department back then. I believe it had to have been Colin Powell was the Secretary of State then, and told them, listen, any type of NATO moves inside of Ukraine is going to cross a red line that not only President Putin, but the Russian people will not tolerate. So, we've known. Now, remember back to last year, actually the very end of 2021, everybody running around, the Russians are building up troops on the Ukrainian border, Well, what nobody reported was the 100,000+ troops Ukraine had built up on the line of contact opposite of Donetsk City in preparation of an offensive to be launched into the Donbass region, which, like I said before, includes the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. Remember, a few days before the 24th, I believe it was the 20th or 21st of February 2022, the representatives and leaders of the two breakaway republics went to President Putin and the Russian government, said, hey, we need help. They're fixing to invade. We need help, immediate help. And Putin went ahead and recognized both republics as individual sovereign republics. He had to do that. That way they could ask him for military assistance and he could provide it. His intelligence had told him that, yes, the Ukrainians are about to invade. They're probably 5 or 6 days away from invading right now. Well, everybody knows the best defense is a good offense. So that's exactly what President Putin did. Told them, go, attack. And I was very surprised at how soft the Russian army was when they went into Ukraine. They were very, very cognizant of civilian casualties. To the detriment of their own soldiers. Did they make mistakes? Absolutely they made mistakes. They sure did. They only entered Ukraine with 150,000 troops. That's what the troop levels have been at up until just recently. They did not have the manpower or equipment for that fight. The Ukrainians outnumbered Russians to the tune of 2.5 or 3 to 1. That's why I would laugh every time somebody would talk about, well, the Russians are getting ready to attack Kiev. They had 30,000 troops around Kiev. Kiev's a city of about, 7 or 8 million people. Or I'll take it back, it's 3 or 4 million people. That 30,000 troops wasn't enough. All that was a holding attack, a holding operation. They pinned a lot of Ukrainian troops down up there. Now, that's the whole reason the Russians had withdrawn from around Kharkov back over into the Lugansk Republic. They didn't have the troops there to defend that much uh, that much front line. The front lines were nearly 1,200 kilometers long, between 12 and 1,500 kilometers. That's a long ways. What a lot of people don't realize is Ukraine is about the size of Texas. It's big. Biggest country in Europe. Now, I want you guys to keep this in mind. I heard just the other day, again, that the Russians have lost 100,000 troops. Well, that's crap. They only invaded with 150,000. Right now, their level's not even 20 or 200,000. If they'd have lost 100,000 troops, they wouldn't have had anybody left. The Ukrainians have lost 100,000 plus. I promise you they have. And if the Ukrainians were winning, why would we have to keep sending them weapons? Why? They started the war with upwards of 1,200 main battle tanks, T-72s and T-64 main battle tanks. Because all those tanks have been destroyed. Just like all their artillery. Just like all their armored personnel carriers. Just like their trucks, all their airplanes. All their anti-aircraft systems. Now, ask yourselves this question. Why? Why is it that nobody in the United States government, nobody in any European government has offered or called for negotiations? Nobody has. They were close to a ceasefire agreement back to end of March, 1st of April, where the Ukrainians and Russians were meeting in Ankara, Turkey. Do you guys remember about that time? Boris Johnson jumped up and flew to Kiev real fast on a surprise trip. Just poof, all of a sudden he was in Kiev meeting Zelensky. Flew back to England, and the very next day, the Ukrainians pulled out of the peace negotiations in Turkey. That's kind of questionable. But why is it that nobody in the United States has called for negotiations, called for a ceasefire? Nobody has. Why is our government so hell-bent on keeping this war going? I'll tell you why. Why they use the motto in the State Department and other halls of infinite wisdom and power in Washington. We'll fight the Russians till the last Ukrainian. Money. It's all about money. Ukraine is the biggest money laundering washing machine in the world. It's what everybody uses it for. That's the most corrupt country in the world. Look at the list of corrupt nations as of 2022. Ukraine is in the top 3. The dumbest thing that I have ever seen in my life is us instigating, helping start, and keeping the war in Ukraine going. And I believe it's for these following reasons. There's 3 or 4 different groups of people in Washington in the government. There's those people that just absolutely hate Vladimir Putin and can't stand the Russian people. Then there's those that believe that the European Union, NATO, and everybody else has to bow down to them, and Putin just absolutely will not do it. The Russian people will not do it. So therefore he's an enemy to them. Then you've got the elected officials in the White House, other places, not just elected officials, appointed officials, bureaucrats, members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, mind you, who are heavily supported by companies, defense contract companies, Lockheed Martin, Grumman, Boeing, all of them, AMC, all of those companies have government contracts, and they all fill the campaign coffers of members of Congress. So those people are for maintaining the war. And keep in mind now, we've sent almost $100 billion, or over $100 billion worth of aid to Ukraine. No, not so fast. Not so fast. I promise you, there has not been that much money sent to Ukraine. The vast majority of that money has gone to defense contract companies right here in the United States, some in Europe, to replace weapon systems for us and our allies that we've sent to Ukraine. Now, you guys can believe that or not, but it's true. It's very true. Because I promise you, Joe Biden or any of the rest of them, Tony Blinken, Lloyd Austin, Mark Milley, McCarthy, the new speaker, I promise you they do not give one shit about the Ukrainian people. They do not care. They don't care. They want to fulfill their agenda, and that's it. If the Ukrainian people or the Ukrainian country doesn't survive this war, so be it. That's okay. And they'll move on to their next target, just like they always do. I've listened to every speech that Putin has made, every press conference that he made since the start of this special military operation. I actually went back and listened to a lot of his other speeches concerning national security framework, stuff like that in Europe for the past several years. Not one time have I heard that man threaten to use nuclear weapons against NATO or Europe or the United States. Not one single time. Not once. Yet every time we turn on the television, or every other day, one of these freaking clowns in the mainstream media is talking about Putin or the Russians are threatening NATO with nuclear weapons. No, he's not. No, he's not. We threatened them. He made it perfectly clear. Russia has a non-first use policy. There are three conditions that would cause the Russians to use nuclear weapons. One is if they get attacked by weapons of mass destruction. A chemical is a nuke, a germ is a nuke is a nuke. If it appears that the Russian homeland is in grave danger due to an invasion, etc., and their troops hit a tripwire level of X amount of casualties or X amount of kilometers pushed back into Russia, then they will deploy nuclear weapons or employ nuclear weapons. The third condition is if their government leadership is attacked. Then they keep open the option of employing nuclear weapons on the attackers. Who can blame them? Not one time has that man threatened nuclear weapons use in Ukraine, over Ukraine, under Ukraine, over in or around Europe. He hadn't done it. I promise you, he has not done it. Nor has Medvedev, nor has Lavrov. None of them have. If you guys go and look on the congressional records and State Department records, up until just a couple of months ago, groups such as Right Sector, Azov, Kraken, etc., these are groups in Ukraine. Actually, they're paramilitary units, or now they're actually part of the Russian or the Ukrainian military. These are right-wing neo-Nazis. The very same people that our grandfathers fought against in the 40s in Europe. The very same people. These are the people who run the Ukrainian government. Oh, but Zelensky's Jewish. I don't give a shit what he is, what he says he is. He is controlled by neo-Nazis running all over Ukraine. It's a fact. But what I was saying about congressional records and the State Department, up until just a couple of months ago, all these groups, they were not considered terrorists, but undesirable groups. Facebook just now let them back onto Facebook, or Meta. These are who we've been supporting. Neo-Nazis. Oh, but Putin's a fascist. What do you mean Putin's a fascist? Putin was in the Soviet Union. He was in the KGB when Russia was still the Soviet Union. He was a colonel in the KGB. He actually likes the West. He spent most of his career, from the time he was a senior captain up till he was a colonel, in Germany. Sure, he was in the KGB, he was in military intelligence. That's what he did. That was his job. But he actually liked the West. But the one thing that the Russian people do is they study and remember history. They remember the last time Nazis were running rampant over Eastern Europe and Russia. That time it cost the Russians between 22 and 26 million people dead. And no, he is not going to tolerate it. That's why his second stated goal of the special military operation was the denazification of the Ukrainian government. Demilitarization of the Ukrainians, denazification, and neutrality. That's it. Those are the three conditions. Though, along with recognizing the two breakaway republics of Crimea now, as well as everything else Russia's captured. The Ukrainian government last year not only made Stepan Bandera, this was a Nazi sympathizer back in World War II, who helped the Nazis kill upwards of 130,000 or so Ukrainians and Russians. The Ukrainian government actually made him a state hero, put statues of him up all over the country. Right about the time the Ukrainian parliament passed laws, which Zelensky signed, banning the Russian language, banning Russian from being taught in schools, banning the Russian flag. It's ridiculous. You could go to prison for speaking Russian. And our government's going to throw our weight behind them. It's unbelievable. What's even more unbelievable is that people got suckered in to supporting the government in supporting them. I'll tell you this. The Russians are not losing the war in Ukraine. The Ukrainians are not winning the war in Ukraine. The Ukrainians are on their very last legs. The Russians are playing the smart game. They could have overrun Bakhmut 3 months ago.